Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Benjamin Kiersch. I'm coordinating the project Knowing Water Better in FAO, a project that deals with water tenure, and it's very exciting to have a high-level panel today. Water tenure is a recent concept, a new concept, and we will see in this session with a diverse panel, a high-level panel, how this relates to the Sustainable Development Goals. Before we start, I would like to give the floor to Sasha Kuoshima to give us some welcoming remarks. Ms. Kuoshima is Deputy Director and Head of Water, Food and Agriculture of the FAO. She has nearly 30 years experience in international assistance, policy development, in agriculture, water, and natural resource management. Currently, she's leading FAO programs on agriculture, water development, land restoration, governance, geospatial data, between others. Before that, she served as senior international advisor at the U.S. Environment Protection Agency, advising the minister and administrator for the environment, as well as the State Department. And she worked for the Secretariat of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, where she directed and managed international environmental programs. Sasha, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Benjamin. And good morning, good afternoon, and good greetings to everyone. On behalf of FAO, I would like to welcome you all to this FAO special session on applying water tenure approaches to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference for making this online meeting possible. And I also like to thank the UNFCCC, the Environmental Law Institute, and also the International Association for Water Law for accepting our invitation to this FAO special session. Ladies, gentlemen, and dear colleagues, in this session, we will explore this social innovation. In the last 2 days of the conference, we heard a lot about science, but the concept of water tenure is very particular to water governance. This is important because in light of global changes and challenges accentuated by the current pandemic, the pressure over our natural resource space is ever more intensified. This pressure calls for a responsible governance of our natural resources in order to promote an economic development that provides a decent livelihoods for all the communities, and also development that can ensure food security for all. And I want to say the word all to stress that importance. There's no food production without water resources. And irrigated areas cover about 20% of the world's arable land. And it is in this 20% of land that we produce 40% of our global food. Where water is scarce, evidently farmers struggle to produce food to maintain their livelihoods. And there's no question that water is key to fighting hunger and poverty as addressed in SDG goals 1 and 2, which are at the heart of FAO's mandate. Water scarcity, soil and land degradation, like food insecurity and poverty, each present complex challenges. The interdependencies between water, land, and food are also visible through the intensification of demand for these resources due to growth in population and incomes, changing consumption patterns, especially in more affluent countries, and low management efficiencies in both supply and demand in various sectors that we witness across the world. These challenges cannot be effectively confronted without appropriate, again, governance arrangements that allow to address these complex interdependencies and trade-offs across natural resources and across economic sectors. A responsible governance of water relies on various mechanisms and processes that can articulate the interests of citizens, mediate the differences between communities, and ensure that their rights and duties with respect to water are exercised with both transparency and equity. These are the foundations of governance. And to address the challenges related to water governance, FAO has further explored and developed a holistic approach in line with FAO member countries adopted, and I want to say adopted, the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests. And to further the concept of tenure to include water, FAO has organized expert roundtable of legal counsels and practitioners who offer the definition of water tenure as the relationships, whether legally or customarily defined, between people as individuals or groups with respect to water resources. This concept embraces both customary and non-customary laws and interconnects the SDGs through inclusion, in quotes. In particular, the inclusion of the most vulnerable people through increasing their water security, increasing their climate resilience, ensuring gender equity, and also ensuring life on land and in water for eradicating hunger. Many issues in governance mechanisms and management of use of water, as well as other natural resources, are directly linked to tenure rights. Yet, despite the awareness of water scarcity challenges, information is often lacking about how the social factors, the people, their access and use of water resources to transfer water in practice, especially in rural and remote areas. This is what we hope to discuss here in this session. A sustainable and reliable management and use of water, particularly in countries where overall demand is outstripping supply, is as much about water governance, power relations, and resolving conflicts of tenure as is about understanding and monitoring about what's going on between rain clouds and water users. This is why FAO is continuously working with our partners to co-create and exchange knowledge to better help and address challenges related to access and the use of water resources. Currently, as Benjamin has mentioned, the KnoWat project, this is a FAO initiative in Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and the Near East. We hope to aim at improving water governance through better understanding the diversity of coexisting water tenure arrangements. This session is part of FAO's efforts to achieve more equitable and secure access to water through building a stronger knowledge about water tenure and governance, and to explore its linkages to the achievement of the diverse sustainable development goals, such as climate change resilience, gender equity, sustaining life on land as well as below water. A better understanding of water governance and water tenure is a prerequisite for achieving major transformations in the present development paradigms, especially we're moving into the Food Systems Summit, and to accelerate the progress towards sustainable and inclusive land and water management and use. The recognition of the concept of water tenure will help to elucidate these issues and identify, recognize, and ultimately protect all legitimate water rights to eradicate hunger and to ensure that no one is left behind. So I thank you all for your attention and wish you a fruitful deliberation and a fruitful session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sasha, for these warm words of welcome. Much appreciated. You actually gave a good introduction already to the concept of water tenure, which many of you in the audience may be asking themselves, what is this concept? What are the elements? So before we dive into our panels, discussions on what does water tenure have to do with the SDGs, we want to show you a short video where we've tried to put together the main elements that make up water tenure, and also show you why it is important to talk about this this issue. This is a very special moment because it's the first time that this video is presented to the audience. So please, Carlton, go ahead.
Water is essential for life. It passes through the landscape in rivers and lakes, flows underground, and is constantly renewed by the water cycle. On its way from source to the sea, water is used many times by different people and for different purposes. Water is needed for drinking and sanitation, businesses and industry. In many countries, the largest water user is agriculture to produce food and sustain farmers' livelihoods. Water is also needed by natural vegetation, wildlife and fish in lakes and rivers. Because water is such an important resource, societies all over the world have special relationships with regard to water. They have developed rules to define how much and when the water can be extracted from a water body like a river, lake or canal. Who can extract this water? For which purpose can it be used? In which conditions water should be returned to the environment? For example, if a farmer wants to use water from a river to cultivate her land, she may need to apply for a permit from the Water Users Association based on the water law. In exchange, she may be asked to help to maintain and clean the canal built by the community. In many societies, water or water bodies also have special cultural or religious values. People enjoy water for recreation, and some consider lakes and streams holy places. All these relationships, rights, rules, duties and practices can be described as water tenure. The relationship, whether legally or customarily defined, between people as individuals or groups with respect to water resources. They can be formal, written down in water laws, regulations and policies. Others are customary, unwritten, communicated by word of mouth and passed on from generation to generation. Water tenure arrangements may allocate various rights, in particular the rights to use water, and define the duties to protect the water resources for other users and natural ecosystems. They can also define how water users can resolve conflicts over water resources. Different water tenure arrangements may coexist in the same region or community, and water users may be part of more than one water tenure arrangement. In many places, rights to use water are traditionally tied to land rights. The owner of a land may have the right to use the stream that runs through her property or the groundwater below her plot. Water tenure arrangements should ensure an equitable distribution to all users and protect natural ecosystems. It is important that existing water tenure arrangements are coherent and that all legitimate tenure rights are recognized by national legislation. Conflicts over water resources can arise if water tenure arrangements do not provide fair access to all persons, or if they are not recognized as legitimate by water users. Water tenure arrangements play an important role in building resilience to increasing extreme weather events, like droughts due to a changing climate. For example, tenure arrangements may regulate how water resources are equitably shared in times of water shortage. Finally, water tenure arrangements must protect the use rights of vulnerable and marginalized groups, including women, small farmers, fisherfolk, and indigenous people, particularly those who do not have access to land. Water is a vital resource. Everyone, including smallholder farmers, must be able to access and use it without excluding others, to sustain their livelihoods and to ensure that no one is left behind.
So much for our brief introduction on water tenure. What is water tenure? And I would like now to introduce to you a great expert on water tenure, somebody who has who has really shaped the debate on this topic. Stefano Burki is an expert in comparative and international freshwater law. He holds law degrees from La Sapienza University of Rome and from Harvard Law School. Stefano has made a career in the development law service of FAO, and since retiring from FAO, he has taken up a variety of water law consultancies. Also has assumed, and he currently is, chairman of the International Association of Water Law. He is furthermore the author of numerous published articles and publications on the law of freshwater resources. Stefano, it's wonderful to have you with us, and now you have the floor to deliver your keynote presentation on applying water tenure concept for improved food security. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ben. Thank you for inviting me to this event. I found the short, film that you showed quite inspirational, extremely well done. So that takes care of, how would I say, putting the audience up to speed with the concept of water tenure that FAO has spearheaded and has helped unpack in its contents and ramifications through the group of experts and the work that Mr. Sasha Kuroshima alluded to in her introductory remarks. Now, against I would like to now size up or see the concept of water tenure against the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which is dedicated, given over to water, and seeks to, or has the ambition to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. And I emphasize the word all, for it implies the ambition of the goal to reach out to the very far end of the water users population spectrum, to the least significant users, and notably this myriad small scale and subsistence users on the ground who engage small to insignificant or minimal volumes of water and whose business value is nil or next to nil. Now, how does the concept of water tenure relate to that, to this ambition? And can water tenure, the concept of water tenure, help achieve the goal and its underlying, or it's actually not the underlying, its stated ambition? Now, as I see it from my legal analyst perspective, the great merit of the concept of water tenure is that it is a legal and partly social construct that is instrumental to ensuring that the water security aspirations and the rights to water, to raw water at source, and not so much drinking water at the tap, which is a different kettle of fish. So access to raw water at source, as we have seen in the short film that has been shown to us earlier, for the livelihood, so for the satisfaction of basic human needs, and for small-scale productive uses of the weaker end of the user's population spectrum are not forgotten. And that these rights, these aspirations, receive recognition and protection by the formal legal system through a variety of legal mechanisms and instruments that I will not elaborate on, because this is not the place to do so. Now, insofar as the SDG 6 reaches out to all water users, and in particular those who are situated at the very far weakest end and marginalized end of the water users population spectrum, the reach and the chief thrust of the concept of water tenure is coterminous with the scope of the Sustainable Development Goal number 6. And by virtue of this, and as a result of this, water tenure can be directly instrumental to achieving the far-reaching overall ambition of SDG 6, to reach out to the very furthest end of the water users population spectrum, with a view to, as we heard earlier, not leaving anyone behind. Moreover, water tenure can help achieve the goals aim to ensure that water is available for all. And I underline this time the word available. Insofar as water tenure, as it has been unpacked through the FAO, through the work of FAO that again was alluded to by Sasha Kuoshima in her introductory remarks, the concept of water tenure, as it has been unpacked, includes substantive use and exclusion rights that the weaker water users can hook their claims to water on, with a view to, as it were, ensuring the water is actually available to support their livelihood. Now, there are practical obstacles on the way to implementing, this approach in terms of access to justice by the weaker and marginal water users. However, my mind, and as I read it, the potential of water tenure to help in this respect is in there. More specifically, water tenure includes also a procedural right to participate in decisions regarding development or activities that could threaten or negatively impact water rights. And this can be directly instrumental to achieving the SDG 6.B, so one of the specific, more detailed articulation of the overall SDG 6, which is to support and strengthen the participation of local communities in improving water and sanitation management. Now, the quality of raw water and pollution control are marginal, perhaps, to the main thrust of the concept of water tenure. But nevertheless, that concept of water tenure can also help achieve the ambition of SDG 6.3 to improve water quality by reducing pollution and by a variety of other means through the procedural right of water tenure holders to challenge in the courts of law administrative decisions affecting their water rights, including by implication administrative decisions to allow wastewater discharges to freshwater bodies that could cause pollution and a deterioration in the quality of water that is available for use. One more, dimension where SDG 6 meet and interact, mutually support each other, is that insofar as it accounts for the land-water nexus within its conceptual scope, water tenure can also help achieve the ambition of SDG 6.5 to implement integrated water resources management at all levels, where integration in the IWRA, integrated water resources management paradigm, in fact, do reach out to beyond water per se, and notably to land and to the land-water interface. And this interface is of particular relevance in connection with water pollution from diffuse sources, notably agricultural activities and practices, and in particular groundwater. And consider that large segments of the rural population rely on groundwater for the satisfaction of the basic necessities of life and for their livelihoods. Because land uses and uses of the subsurface space have the potential to interfere with the natural groundwater recharge and discharge processes and with the environment support function of groundwater in relation, in particular, to oases and wetlands. In conclusion, water tenure, the concept of water tenure can directly or also indirectly, but in my view, no less compellingly, be instrumental to achieving not only the far-reaching ambition of Sustainable Development Goal number 6 on water, but also the more specific ambitions that are embedded in a number of the enunciations, or specific particular enunciations of that goal. Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Stefano, for this very concise presentation of the relationship of water tenure with SDG 6. And now we would like to learn from you. What do you consider elements of water tenure? And if the colleagues could put now the first poll, audience poll on site. We've prepared a question. There are no right and wrong answer. We just would like to get a feeling of what do you feel are elements which are included in the concept of water tenure. It's multiple choice. You can choose as many of these as you want to. Unfortunately, the panelists are not allowed to vote, but the audience can. We have rights here. We have water markets. We have irrigation performance. We have rules, land ownership, duties, environmental flow, and practices. So please take a moment to reflect. We will give you about a minute to reflect and to make your choices, and then together look at the evaluation of this. In the meantime, I would also, while you make your choices, I would like to draw your attention to the Q&A box. I see that questions are coming in, and thank you very much to the panel of already opening this and answering some questions as we go along. That is much appreciated. Please ask all the questions you have in this Q&A box. That is great. Another few seconds for you to think and make your choice or choices, and then we will look at the results. The majority of the 33 participants who've voted say that rights are an important element of water tenure. Certainly, water markets, only 15% say that it's an element of water tenure. Very interesting. Irrigation performance, 33%. Rules, 80%. Land ownership, 36%. That's a very interesting one. Jean-Maurice Durand, one of our panelists, will say something more on that one. Duties, also 33%. Environmental flows, 36%. And practices, 70%. Excellent. Thank you very much for your answers. As I said before, there's no right and wrong in this, just to get a feel of what you perceive is an element of water tenure. Let us now go to the next round of presentations. We have 4 short interventions to take us into the realm of different SDGs and look at how water tenure is related to these sustainable development goals. And I'm very pleased now to introduce to you Regina Mandahar from the United Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat. Regina leads the Nairobi Work Program on Adaptation to Knowledge, Action Hub for Adaptation and Resilience at the UNFCCC Secretariat. She's passionate about understanding barriers faced by policymakers and practitioners in countries that hinder them to scale up adaptation. Over the past 15 years, Regina has worked on the scientific, technical, and policy aspects of impacts, vulnerability, and adaptation to climate change on thematic topics of water resources, oceans and coastal areas, biodiversity, human settlements, health, mountain ecosystem, and ecosystem-based adaptations. She's done this at a global level as well as regionally in South Asia, North America, and Europe. She also represents the UNFCCC Secretariat on UN Water and the steering committee. She's steering committee member on FAO's Global Framework on Water Scarcity in Agriculture, WASAC. Regina, it's a great pleasure to have you here with us, and please tell us, what does water tenure have to do with climate change?
Thank you so much, Benjamin, and thank you so much for this opportunity to be here as a part of the panelists, and very delighted. What I was going to use my 5 minutes, and I hope I can keep up to the time, and please let me know if I go over time, and I'm happy to stop at a time if it's necessary. I was going to use thanks, Benjamin. I was going to use this time to talk briefly to the overarching context of the UNFCCC, which I think would be relevant for the participants here, and how this is in relation to the water and maybe water tenure issue, which I'll be probably speaking a bit broadly, but also will focus on water tenure, and then talk about the instruments that we have in the UNFCCC context. For example, nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, which also highlight and integrate adaptation priorities, including focusing on water. And then I'll have a few conclusions to finish off. So let me start by providing an overarching context of the UNFCCC and the perspective from the governments in this context. As we all know, UNFCCC provides a foundation for multilateral action to combat climate change and its impact on humanity and ecosystems. And water is definitely a very critical cross-cutting sector in this regard. And governments consider scientific information agreed actions to be undertaken as a part of the UNFCCC multilateral process. What it means, they gather and share information on emissions, climate risk, national policy, and best practices, and develop international guidance to inform this process at the international level, and of course, to implement action in the national context and globally. And some of the instruments I think would be relevant for us to know and to be aware of are the ones I briefly mentioned: nationally determined contributions, NDCs in short, national adaptation plans, and long-term low emission development strategy that countries are obligated to implement or develop as part of the Paris Agreement. And one of the significant finding, I think, which is very much in relation to our keynote speaker point about and they're talking about the water tenure issue, is about the new work that it's not new per se for UNFCCC, but for those who are following the UNFCCC, we do have a local communities and indigenous peoples platform, which is an open and inclusive space and brings together people and knowledge systems to build a climate resilient world for all. So I hope this platform also provides a very useful context to our conversation in the session today. Let me go a bit deeper in what NDCs are and what it means for the discussion we're having on water priorities. NDCs are, as we know, at the heart of Paris Agreement and achievement of the long-term goals. And NDCs, in a way, embody effort of by each country, all countries who are party to the convention, in order to reduce the national emissions, the greenhouse gas emission, also to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And let me maybe draw your attention to the latest NDCs or updated or new NDCs that the governments have submitted. And here we have 39 parties who provided adaptation component in the NDCs, and 8 of them were focusing on adaptation communication. And they provide information on vulnerability, national circumstances, efforts to enhance research, among others. And I think it's very important to note that water is a very important priority sector that has emerged in the NDCs that were submitted by governments. And here, for example, in the 31 adaptation elements or components, freshwater resources was identified as a priority area. Maybe some of the elements I'm going to present here might not be directly linked as a part of the water tenure, but I think this is very relevant when we talk about the measures for enhancing availability, efficiency, and quality of water supplements. For example, enhancing water infrastructure and water resource plans, strategy, and systems. So the parties are indeed aiming to strengthen watersheds, efficiency and irrigation, and also integrated water resource management, which also includes, for example, protection and restoration of water-related ecosystems, forests, wetlands, and rivers, and supply diversification. So these measures are very much integrated in the NDCs, and this could be a very useful, I think, resource or reference, for example, that I will be happy to share in the chat after my intervention. And also very important in the context of SDGs, that parties have indeed prioritized the interlinkages of how this adaptation priority efforts, including in water, links with the SDG goals, not just in climate change, but also the SDG goals and other SDG goals.
Regina, you have 1 minute.
Okay, thanks. Then maybe a final point on the national adaptation plans, which are also a main instrument for countries to plan and implement adaptation priorities. And it's also very useful to note that the national adaptation plans also makes very specific adaptation actions on water, which also includes topics around water tenure, which is, for example, on indigenous water management practices, traditional knowledge, irrigation systems, among others. And one of my final point was, in order to advance the technical guidance on the national adaptation plans, UNFCCC is applying an integrative system approach, which is to integrate how we can analyze climate risk and also implementing adaptation action, including the framework of NAPs and SDGs, which is called the NAP SDG I-frame. And this is a relevant context here because this also draws upon how we can identify the national systems for development, which is aligning with the SDG, and also Sendai and other relevant frameworks in the international context, which would then help to address climate risk in the medium to long term in alignment with identified goals. In conclusion, what I wanted to draw to everyone's attention is parties have identified more systematic linkages with other international frameworks, in particular SDGs and Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, including in relation to the adaptation priorities focusing on water. And I think it's really useful to look at not the silo approach, but thinking of systems in terms of who to engage in terms of actors, and also to promote an approach that brings everyone that is relevant for addressing the issue at hand. Thank you so much, Benjamin. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Regina, for this very succinct presentation. What climate change has to do with water tenure, and of course, I think we all agree that yes, water scarcity and how we deal with this is of course a very central element of climate change adaptation. Thank you so much. Now we go to another SDGs, very central SDG number 5 of gender equity. And here I have the pleasure to introduce to you our next panelist, Jess Trell. Jess is a senior attorney and director of the International Water and Africa programs at the Environmental Law Institute. Jess has over 20 years experience in international development and environmental law, with a focus on developing and implementing inclusive, equitable and effective legal policy and institutional tools for sustainable water resources management. She's a recognized authority on international and comparative water law and governance, gender and water governance and resource tenure issues, community-based water rights, public participation in resource management, and the nexus between water governance and peace building. Jess, it's wonderful to have you. Jess is joining us from Harare, Zimbabwe. And please, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for the opportunity to be part of this fantastic discussion today. So as Ben mentioned, I will very briefly, hopefully, address the role of water tenure in meeting SDG 5, which calls for gender equality. The linkages between water tenure and water governance more broadly and gender equality are diverse, and they reflect the critical importance of integrated approaches, which we've been hearing from all the speakers, to achieving the SDGs as a whole. Women around the world have important water management responsibilities, unique water needs, and differentiated priorities for water use and management. Globally, women and girls bear the main burden of unpaid household work, including water collection. Women also play critical roles in food production and water management for both household and productive uses. In fact, women constitute about 43% of the world's agricultural labor force, but they're much less likely than men to have control over their water resources. Moreover, satisfying the water and sanitation needs of women and girls is an important aspect of achieving positive reproductive health outcomes and increasing educational opportunities for girls, all critical to realizing the SDG 5 targets. Yet, despite the broad international recognition of women's distinctive water needs, knowledge, and management skills, despite the clear linkages that water tenure rights have to women and families' sustainable livelihoods, health, and food security. And despite the substantial evidence that the meaningful engagement of women and girls promotes both sustainability and equity in water projects and their outcomes, men continue to dominate water governance and decision-making at all levels. This continued failure to represent women's water needs, knowledge, and skills in decision-making inhibits the establishment of truly equitable and sustainable water policies and practices. Strengthening women's water tenure, which, as Stefano mentioned, includes the bundle of rights that are most essential to women's water security, including water use and governance rights, is one clear pathway for achieving not only gender equality and the targets of SDG 5, which I think are up behind me, I can't see them, but also the SDGs related to the sustainable resource use and management, to food security, climate impacts, as we've just heard, education, and poverty alleviation, among others. So how can we strengthen women's water tenure to achieve these goals? I want to just share briefly 3 potential avenues that are based on my organization, ELI's, past and ongoing applied research with partners such as the FAO and others on water tenure. First, there's a critical need to more clearly recognize and protect women's water rights in national level water legislation. In a recent study of Indigenous and community-based water tenure undertaken by ELI and our partner, the Rights and Resources Initiative, we found that among 39 water tenure regimes identified across 15 countries, less than a third specifically recognized women's water use or governance rights or prioritized women as water users. The fact that water laws are generally gender blind means that in practice, they often reinforce existing gender inequities and discriminatory cultural norms. Second, it's important to recognize that women's water tenure rights in many countries hinges on the interface between customary laws and government issued laws that may or may not recognize customary rights. The alignment of customary and legislative water tenure is complex and culturally sensitive, but it is critical that the recognition, the legal recognition of customary water rights is done in a way that provides a floor of legal protections for women's rights, including non-discrimination and equitable resource access, use, and governance, to ensure that both legislative and customary tenure systems effectively respect and protect those rights. And finally, and as we keep hearing, which is lovely to see, meaningfully addressing the existing gender inequities in water tenure requires a careful unpacking of the diverse legal and practical linkages between women's water and land tenure rights. In the same analysis of community water tenure, we found that over 60% of tenure regimes have what we refer to as a legal land-water nexus, where water tenure rights are dependent on recognized land and/or forest rights. This is a critical finding because globally, less than 15% of landholders are women, and women own a significantly smaller share of land than men. The water tenure rights of many women around the world, therefore, cannot be adequately safeguarded if their land and forest rights are not also legally recognized and secure. This implies a strong need to not only strengthen women's land and forest tenure rights more broadly, but also to ensure that where water tenure rights emanate from land-based laws and practices, that they're better harmonized with water legislation, as well as with inheritance and marriage laws, among others. Where these sectoral laws fail to speak to each other or even contradict one another, as is often the case, women's water tenure rights are left vulnerable to legal challenge. Overall, such reforms will require a concerted effort for countries to take a more integrated approach to tenure governance that recognizes the specific impacts of these intersectoral connections on women's water tenure rights in particular. At the global level, this needs to be supported by ensuring that international standards for land and forest tenure governance, as Sasha mentioned earlier, the VGGT in particular, the voluntary guidelines, that these can integrate water more effectively and build on the experiences and lessons from the applied research I just discussed and from the outcomes of work like the KnoWat project. So I think I've stayed under 5 minutes, and thank you all for listening.
You're spot on, Jess. Thank you. Thank you. That yeah, really is a great great way of summarizing how gender equity and water tenure are intertwined. And I think one of the issues you mentioned that there's also this very strong linkage between land tenure and water tenure, land and water rights. This is the we should explore more in detail, and we're doing this now with our next panelist, Jean-Maurice Durand, who is Engineer General in Water and Forest, seconded by Expertise France to FAO as a senior land and water tenure expert. He is managing a large portfolio of projects implemented in Francophone, Sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa. He has worked during 12 years in West Africa, mainly on water resources management. Spent 7 years in French Guiana as deputy director and finally director of agriculture and forestry. Then worked for the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, for 4 years on land tenure issues before joining the FAO land tenure team in 2014. It's great to have you, Jean-Maurice, and please tell us how land tenure and water tenure are interlinked. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ben. I want to now address the interest of promoting actually an integrated land and water tenure approach to achieve SDG 15 and others, actually, not only the 15. It has been addressed actually by other panelists before, but I want to recall actually the importance of our basis for work on land tenure at FAO, let's say, meaning the VGETs already mentioned, and in particular their implementation principle number 5, which recommends a holistic approach when dealing with natural resources management. This principle actually encourages to recognize that natural resources and their uses are interconnected, and it's particularly true between land and water, but not only actually, and to adopt an integrated approach to their administration. And even if water tenure is not a topic included in the VGET, it's obvious that water needs to be taken into consideration in this principle, and that the nexus land and water is particularly key when talking about agricultural development or environmental preservation measures. Indeed, I think that articulating responsible water tenure and land governance and land tenure governance actually is also of utmost importance to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of ecosystems, which is precisely actually the objective of SDG 15, but is also crucial to achieve other SDGs. We have just seen SDG 5, but also 6, 13, etc. are concerned. Let me take a few examples very simple actually, to illustrate these preliminary notes. When you undertake, for example, water and soils conservation measures, such as the construction of stone bunds, you follow a hydrological logic, as the bunds are built along the topographic control lines, as we know. If it is done without careful consideration of the spatial organization of land tenure, it may create actually conflicts and jeopardize the success of the whole project itself. In this type of operation, a design integrating land tenure, land and water management, actually, land and water tenure is obviously required. It's even more the case when we talk about more complex projects such as irrigation dams. I personally saw in several places, several areas, some examples of dams not operating, the water non-used actually because of land disputes that had not been resolved beforehand. In that case as well, an integrated approach of land and water management should be the rule, and there are plenty of examples like this. I would say more generally, when intending to restore ecosystems, combat desertification, stop or reverse degradation of natural resources, the legitimate land tenure rights of individuals and communities need to be recognized and protected. This is a strong VGET recommendation, and we can extend this notion also to water tenure rights, as it has been already mentioned. This is not only a question of justice, actually, but also a condition for the success of operations, and finally for the achievement of the SDG 15 and others. In this spirit, I want to mention that FAO and UNCCD join efforts to prepare a technical guide on how to integrate land tenure into the objective of land degradation neutrality. It is based on a system of pathways, actually, describing how to apply the vigility principles to achieve at the end, bridging these two topics by addressing the barriers between both. And pathways address thematic issues such as policy coordination, which is very important also to manage, to have a coherent approach between the various policies, sectoral policies, accessible grievance mechanisms, or integrating the land use planning, also are topics addressed in this method. However, such integrated let's say, approaches, as we have said, including the land and water nexus, requires a good understanding of the notion of water governance and of water tenure, and of how actually water tenure regimes are legally defined, implemented, and protected in practice. This has been mentioned previously in the movie also, which remains actually a challenge. This notion, as it has been already said, is not well spread for the time being, contrarily to the notion of land tenure, which is relatively well known. To this regard, a broad definition of water tenure can be the relationship, whether legally or customarily defined, between people as individuals or groups with respect to water resources. And it has been mentioned, so I will not add more on that. And FAO is currently developing and testing in several countries methodologies suggesting new opportunities for securing local water rights, actually, when building on solid and field-based knowledge. And this methodology has also been inspired by the vigility principles and takes into consideration the recommendation for a more holistic approach. I will simply conclude by saying that a proper consideration of an integrated approach of land and water, actually based on solid governance and tenure assessment, are definitely crucial for designing policies, strategies, and also projects, programs that are not only technically doable and efficient, but also politically acceptable and maybe above all socially beneficial, meaning in a nutshell, key conditions for achieving the SDG and in particular SDG 15. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jean-Maurice, for enlightening us on the links between water tenure and SDG 15 on land. Indeed, when you look at water rights and how water is distributed, many times you find that land rights are very closely linked to water rights, or vice versa. And of course, as you have very clearly also said, that of course land users have the way you use land has a lot of impact on water resources availability for the same landholder or also for other users in the same basin. And this very nicely illustrates those interlinkages. Thank you so much, Jean-Maurice. Last but not least, I would like to introduce our fifth panelist, and I'm very glad that you're with us today, Rebecca. Rebecca Metzner, she is a senior fisheries officer with the fishery division of FAO in Rome. She's a social scientist, and her work has revolved around the many core challenges of fisheries management. She leads the assessment and management team's work to harmonize fisheries tenure, secure access, use rights, and sustainable fisheries. And Rebecca will be giving us an insight how water tenure is related to SDG number 14, life below water. The floor is yours, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Thank you to the organizers and to one and all for being here, and a good Wednesday, if we may. It's certainly exciting to be part of this integrated event, which is showcasing the really multifaceted nature of water and tenure. I was asked to discuss water tenure and the links to SDG 14, life below water. But that really means, at least to a fisheries person, to discuss how does water tenure help us in eliminating poverty, providing for food security and nutrition, recognizing gender equality, encouraging more equitable and sustainable land use, and ensuring fisheries and aquaculture activities are sustainable. But that's not just sustainable for the fishermen, but in terms of biodiversity, economics, their social and cultural values, and that these fisheries and aquaculture activities are resilient and can cope with a multitude of stressors, whether it's pandemics, climate change, population growth, or urbanization, because fish and fisheries contribute to all of these SDGs. So I'm simplifying the question a little bit to say, how does tenure help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goals? Because fish are food, lives, and livelihoods. Now, water is a dynamic and complex environment. It's an ecosystem, yet at the same time, it provides ecosystem functions and services. It maintains biodiversity, ensuring a better environment. The entire seasonality of water environs, their changing flows and temperatures provide the cues of life for the things in them. And at the same time, they support life cycles of fish, birds, plants, animals. So it's the environment, it's the realm in which we find many capture fisheries that provide essential nutrition and food security. It's also the pillar for many types of aquaculture. At the same time, water is irrigating our crops, allowing for better production. It's generating energy. It's providing aesthetic, touristic, and recreational values. It's the medium for transporting goods. In short, water ecosystems have the possibility of helping us do many, many different things in our lives. Now, I'm going to posit that if we recognize all the uses of water, including the ones I haven't mentioned today, so if we take an ecosystem approach, and if we recognize the validity of all of these, that then we start getting on how water and fisheries contribute to the many SDGs. And that's, I believe, the basis for the discussions and decisions that we need to be making. And I'm going to add the caveat, but we're talking about fresh water, brackish water, or salt water. So all of these environments are relevant. Now, I think there are 4 broad answers or areas of answers to the big question of how does tenure help us achieve various SDGs, whether we're talking about terrestrial or marine water. Tenure has the potential, and if it's well understood from all of these different angles, to help us with clarifying the different users, indigenous, women, farmers, fishermen, aquaculturists, and others, the different users and uses of water. Tenure has the potential to clarify access to water. Who gets what, when, how, and where. Tenure also has the possibility of creating the approach, the mechanisms, and processes for sharing water resources and spaces, and assisting in resolving conflicts amongst water users and water uses. Now, finally, I'd like to remind everyone, we've heard this already today, but our discussions and actions in this realm are certainly not starting from scratch. Besides the significant careers of the previous speakers in this area, we also have signposts and guidance about how to proceed at the international level. We have the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. We have the voluntary guidelines on responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests. We also have the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries, which address the issue of tenure. We have the CFS principles for responsible investment in agriculture, which again mention tenure of land and fisheries and gender issues that go along with this. We also have something called, the most recent item is the Rome Declaration, which is 10 steps to responsible inland fisheries. And that actually lays out to deal with tenure in these different environments. So what we really need to be doing now is moving from these roadmaps into action so that we do deliver on the SDGs. And with a small portion of food for thought, I want to thank you for your attention, express my appreciation to my colleagues, although all errors are mine, and I look forward to the question, answer, and discussion on how water tenure can help us achieve a myriad of SDGs. Thank you very much, and over to you, Benjamin.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for giving us a fisheries view on water tenure, and not only that, but nicely tying it into other SDGs also. And this nicely leads over to our second and last audience poll. If you would like, if the colleagues could share it, we've heard now about water, the relation of water tenure to SDGs 6, water supply and sanitation. We've explored SDG 13, water tenure and climate change, water tenure and gender equity, SDG 5, life on land and below water, SDGs 15 and 14. But we would like to know from you what, in your opinion, which other SDGs have a relation with water tenure. Again, there's a multiple choice. You can select as few or as many of the SDGs, of the remaining SDGs as you want. And then we will look in a minute at your opinions. So we have here SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 3, good health and well-being, SDG 4, quality education, SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, SDG 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, SDG 10, reduced inequality, SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, and finally SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. So take another moment to reflect, maybe another 30 seconds, and then we will close also this poll and look at your evaluations. Remember, there are no wrong answers here. This is about your personal opinion and appreciation of the linkages of this concept of water tenure with the different sustainable development goals. Let's close the poll now and have a look at your responses. We have 66 and 66% of you say that water tenure is relevant for SDG 1 on fighting poverty. 86% say it's important for good health and well-being. Okay, 24% of you opine that's important for quality education, 7 for affordable and clean energy, 8 for decent work and economic growth, SDG 8 say 45%. 45% also say it's important for industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and so forth. It's striking that none of you have said that that all SDGs are somehow related to water tenure, to this concept. I see Jess is raising her hand. I'll let you talk in a minute. It's really it's important to see, as you have heard already during the very nice panel discussion, this nice panel discussion, that it is indeed a concept that is relevant to many SDGs. I would like to invite the panelists to give very short final statements, as we're almost out of time. 1 minute each to react to the to any of the open questions that you can see in the panel, or to this poll. I would like to invite Stefano to give his appreciation. Stefano.
I have just going through quickly questions that have been raised. The one that I can relate to quickly is the question to what extent water tenure requires a functioning government, state, or political system capable of establishing some rules. Well, in fact, it does. To my mind, it does. It is the concept itself, and its its implementation on the ground is predicated upon, a functioning system, a functioning government capable of establishing rules. Water tenure is all about rules, actually. So it is predicated upon functioning government, although in a customary situation, government is not necessarily a prerequisite, but it is a prerequisite to ensuring a smooth coexistence between formal and the informal systems, and especially considering that informal systems are prevalent, in much of the rural areas of the world.
Thanks.
I will stop here and leave room for others.
Thanks very much, Stefano. Regina, what is your final appreciation? Do you have a question you want to react to, or just give a final statement for 1 minute?
Sure. I'll maybe keep overall reflection, and it was very, for me, a learning session as well. I learned from other panelists, and again, want to reemphasize the fact that while we are looking at the water tenure as a topic, it's still, I think, important to think in a broader holistic approach, and how we can engage actors, which not just focusing on a climate change as a lens, but perhaps thinking about how we can holistically consider climate risk and adaptation solutions at different scales, if you will, at community levels, subnational, territorial, national, and transboundary levels. And one of the thinking there behind is to also see how we can harmonize efforts and avoid duplications, which is also one of the consideration we do in the work under the UNFCCC process. And one of the learning for me also by looking at all the panelists here is the importance of how we can think about how we can think of the framework, which also allows us to monitor and evaluate the outcomes across various goals, and not thinking in a silo approach. Thanks, Benjamin.
Thank you very much, Regina. Very, very nice sum. And please, Jess, you have the floor for a final statement.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was a learning session for me, and I was delighted to hear from the other speakers and to hear the questions. I think for me, one of the most important themes that I heard across all of our presentations was that of integrated tenure governance, and the idea that there are so many both legal and practical linkages across not just land and water, but land, water, fisheries, forests that need to be unpacked. Not only because it will help us, as Stefano emphasized, I think in his keynote, help us really understand how we can strengthen legal frameworks to recognize all legitimate tenure rights and protect those rights, but particularly those of vulnerable populations, rural communities, indigenous peoples, and the women within those communities in particular. So I think really understanding how at multiple tiers, again, sort of at the legal framework level, how laws are or are not speaking to each other, how policies are or are not speaking to each other on these issues, down to the very practical level of how these things function in practice and how we can support communities and vulnerable stakeholders in particular in a more integrated approach to managing resources, both for community livelihoods and for environmental benefits.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jess, for these nice final words. Jean-Maurice, do you have a final statement or a question you would like to react to? You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, everybody, for this very interesting discussion. Maybe I will pick up one of the questions that was addressed to me, actually, in the list from Iman, asking how water tenure can be applied in case of transboundary dam, and the person cites the dam on the Nile, which objectives are for energy production. I will not, let's say, of course, answer extensively to this question, and especially to this particular case that I don't know, but I can maybe underline something important. I think regarding water management, transboundary issues are real challenges, actually, and really complex. And that's why, in particular, it was not, water was not included in the VGTs during the negotiation process in particular. But what I would say is that the transboundary cooperation, according to me, is key in adaptation to climate change and, let's say, preserving biodiversity. It's also necessary to prevent, actually, the negative effects and can help to prevent conflicts in water tenure and water management. And I think that the cooperation at basin level is a very important thing, and there are examples in the world, actually. In Europe, the Danube river, the Rhine River as well, have organization of that type, and the water tenure, actually, even if it is not called like this, is defined through a charter or through documents like this. I think it is also a good opportunity, the transboundary cooperation, to promote what I was talking about, a holistic approach of the natural resources management, in particular of the nexus land and water. And I will simply cite an example currently under process, which is in the Senegal River Basin under the OMVS Aegis. OMVS is the French acronym for the basin, let's say, authority, and they have already a water charter, actually, defining the water management in the basin, and they are now preparing a land charter, actually, and with the intention to articulate both documents. So I think these are examples, I think, showing that it is very important also to address these aspects at a transboundary level, even if it is not simple, of course, but this is absolutely necessary to achieve also the SDGs.
Thank you very much, Jean-Maurice, for adding this very important dimension of transboundary water management and how it relates to water tenure. Finally, Rebecca, here I would like to give you the floor if you have a question that you would like to address or some final words.
Thanks very much, Benjamin. I really am thrilled by this discussion about integrated management, because it really is very much a new paradigm. It's an old new paradigm, but it's actually happening. And that is just absolutely fantastic. We do need to, besides thinking about the mechanical, technical, and legal elements of shared water tenure and water tenure discussions, we also have to remember the political economy of all of this. Some of these discussions just would not have been able to happen a decade ago. And so even that in itself is a nice milestone to have achieved and to start really having solid discussions. Of course, when we're talking about a myriad of stakeholders in this, whether they're fish farmers, women, men, we actually need to be able to think about the capacity to participate, and not necessarily on an equal basis, but on an equitable basis. And that's where we do see that the inclusion of marginalized and vulnerable groups really need to be part of this as discussion, as well as the ability to participate on an equitable footing. Now, coming together like this is very much part of that discussion. And so I think we need to make sure that if we're going to address water tenure issues, and someone says what to do to face water tenure issues, I think we need to come together. We need to think about the mechanics. We need to think about the political economy of it and share this dialogue so that we move forward together on it. And by having fora like this, it's very delightful to be included in these discussions, because then we really will be able to, and to paraphrase one of the water tenure speakers, Water Tenure Monday speakers, then we'll be able to really understand and work out whose water is it. Thanks for noticing.
Thank you very much. Those are very nice last words, and thank you very much for pointing out this this very important perspective, of course, of looking at water tenure also through the lens of the political economy and the power relations of people of different parts of the society. This, of course, is very central, a very central part of this concept. Thank you very much, everybody, for your wonderful participation. Thank you very much for keeping within the time limit. I think this was particularly difficult because they are big subjects that we are discussing, and you really made a wonderful point of putting it together in a very succinct manner. Thank you very much also to all of the audience to actively participate and to putting questions. Please keep posting your questions, and these can be answered still by the panelists as we go along, even though we have not been able to address all of them now in this session, but they will still be answered, and then they are available. The answers are available to all the audiences. Finally, and Rebecca has already mentioned our Water Tenure Mondays series. If you're more interested in hearing about different facets about this topic of water tenure, I invite you cordially to our Water Tenure Mondays series. Maybe we can put them. We can put it in the chat. The program every Monday from now until the middle of July, and then again in September we're starting a batch. We will discuss water tenure from different perspectives and in different cases. Finally, I would like to invite you to visit the conference website. And also particularly, Callum has posted it already in the chat. There are also poster presentations that I would like to draw your attention to. They can be found under the posters menu of the conference website. If you have any questions on these posters, please send an email to the organizers that you can also find there, and they will put you in touch with the poster authors. The video recording of this session, if you would like to see it again or share it, please do. It will be available on the conference website in about 1 or 2 weeks time. So please check back and share this. Look again and share this session. Thanks again also to Sasha, of course, who did a wonderful introduction, and the organizers of this conference. It is very much appreciated, and everybody that worked behind the scenes to make this a very nice and smooth session. This concludes our session on water tenure and applying this concept to achieve the SDGs. I hope you liked the session. You have some good takeaway messages for you. Again, all of your contributions are highly appreciated, and I wish you a wonderful afternoon, and please stay online for the next sessions to come. Thank you all.